Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Kelly, the CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications. Welcome to today's show. I'd like to start us off by welcoming one of our new members, the People's Yoga Studio here in Lansing, Michigan. The owner's name is Misty Ballou. So welcome Misty and People's Yoga. We're welcoming them on behalf of our sponsor, Marana Group, who is a data document and distribution company in Kalamazoo. So Brian, let's kick off with some breaking news. Chief Justice McCormick has just announced her retirement.
Yeah, this was kind of a shocker. Because it was retirement, but she's not retirement age. I assume there'll be another stage of her career coming up. This Chief Justice McCormick is in her second term on the Supreme Court. These are long terms; they're 8-year terms on the Supreme Court. But in her second term, when she ran for re-election, she did so with SBM's support from our political action committee. So she's been just a great friend of the association, and our members, has been at many events and love to connect directly with small business owners. So actually, we're pretty bummed about this. But it'll be timed for the end of the year. So what happens is that when somebody resigns from the Supreme Court, the governor gets an appointment, but that won't happen until after the next election, the resignation. So it was announced today. It won't be effective until closer to the end of the year and after the election, which give the maximum amount of time for the governor's appointee to serve before standing for another election. And with all due respect, it's hard for me to imagine the governor's appointment being as good as Justice McCormick has been in terms of being a friend of our association and our members. So all the best wishes to her and her journey in the future. And as soon as we start hearing the rumblings of who may be next after that, we'll certainly let you know.
All right. So a few weeks ago, we introduced the concept of quiet quitting. That's when employees kind of scale back on their tasks and lower their output. But now we have another new catchphrase. It was in today's newsletter called quiet firing. And that's kind of when employers maybe treat workers badly or to the point where they quit instead of the employer just firing them.
It's kind of fascinating to me as this discussion has ensued, where we've seen there's all these kind of different trends since the pandemic that have really risen up, and maybe they've always been there to some extent, but really seem more pronounced. And the concept originally of quiet quitting, where somebody would just, kind of do the very minimum required to not get fired, and then keep the job, but really not perform well. And then this idea of the employees really said, well, what about quiet firing, which is essentially the concept of employers keeping somebody at kind of a low level or a low rate of pay for a long period of time, or maybe treating them so badly that they'll quit instead of getting fired. I think all of these types of things, it just shows you there's a lot of churn right now in the labor force. We see it and feel it showing up in a lot of different ways. But the level of dissatisfaction that is kind of bubbling to the surface and frankly just animosity that is showing up in the employee-employer relationship, and with these concepts that are, like I said, maybe they've been around for a while, but now kind of getting a name and trending more. It's one of the things that I love about the leadership around the small business leadership around SBAM and our members that are really kind of leading the way and cutting edge and taking care of employees, creating a family environment in their businesses. Of course, a lot of times it literally is family in the business, but small business owners that are doing some pretty amazing things on the employment front in order to overcome these problematic and difficult workforce trends.
And we can definitely share a link to that article if you missed it in today's newsletter, so you can read some of the things you can do to maybe combat this potential issue. Another article was from Crain's Detroit, and that article kind of spotlighted that Detroit is rebounding to some pre-COVID numbers in terms of visitors. They're hosting new events, and events are coming back, but the office worker traffic has a long way to go.
Yeah, I thought this was a pretty good illustration of how uneven the recovery really is. Some things change permanently, and the whole business structure or business model behind certain areas and certain operations has changed in a way that still hasn't recovered. In others, though, they're experiencing record volumes, and so like in Detroit, if you were to look at visitor traffic, just the events that are happening and the things, the tourism related travel to the area really is, it has recovered nicely. But if you were to look at if you were to look more at the office worker type of traffic, it hasn't recovered. And frankly, there's not a good reason to believe that it will anytime soon. So in fact, I think there's a better reason to believe it could get worse as you see some of the bigger players in the decisions that they're making. So it's kind of a tale of two worlds when it comes to the economic performance since the pandemic. But it certainly is good to see the visitor traffic up. And this week is the media preview and the charity preview Friday, kicking off the Detroit Auto Show, which has been on hiatus since before the pandemic, and so it now is coming back, and it'll be back in the fall. It used to be in the middle of winter in January, which kind of a terrible time actually to do it. But so now doing it this fall, and a lot of excitement around it. You know, it's lost the title of International Auto Show. It's the Detroit Auto Show now, and but it's in many respects, it's considered the big one, you know, in terms of automotive unveiling. So look to see a lot of automotive news over the next couple of weeks as different OEMs and manufacturers roll out new models, new technology, new things that they're doing.
So as we talk about office workers, there was a recent Wall Street Journal article that suggests COVID is keeping maybe as many as 500,000 workers out of the labor force right now.
You know, as we think about like where have all the workers gone, and if you look at the projections in workforce trends from pre-COVID and where they were as of February of 2020 and compare them, you'll see that there's a pretty good size gap in people that have left the workforce, and so in the Wall Street Journal article, it was referencing a study that suggested that there were plenty of health related reasons that people have exited the workforce, and that's still a big part of that. Well, I say a big part of the gap, 500,000 people. It's a lot of people, but that's nationwide, and so there's it just goes to show there's a long tail on it. You know, we've moved past the pandemic in terms of restrictions, and largely people are operating according to their new normal, and there aren't too many people that are kind of waiting for things to change back. This is how it's going to be moving forward. But then the number of people outside of the workforce continues to be a major strain. And it's really a double whammy in Michigan, because not only are the direct COVID related changes, but also people that have permanently left the workforce because of our demographics and the average age of the workforce and the population here in Michigan being higher than in other states.
So let's kind of move to the election. We had 2 more ballot questions get certified on Friday. And so what can voters expect to see in November on the ballot?
As these make the ballot, we'll let you know what they are, even in cases like with these 2 where they're not really SBAM issues. So the first one to make the ballot is an issue that we have a position on in favor of the change in term limits from 6 years in one chamber and 8 years in the other chamber, to say 12 total between the 2 chambers, and then adding in some financial transparency requirements for legislators and those candidates for office. So That's on the ballot. It's proposal 1. We support that. These next 2 to make the ballot really aren't SBAM issues, not small business issues, but so that you know, the ones that that made the ballot were certified by the Board of Canvassers after some court action are the proposal to enshrine abortion rights in the Constitution, and also separate to enshrine some expanded voting rights and requirements in the Constitution as well. So you should expect to see at least 3 proposals now to vote on. These would be at the bottom of your ballot when you get them. And ballots will be printed real soon. So these are the ones that will likely be on the ballot. Technically, there are some citizens initiatives that could eventually make it to the ballot, but I think those are more likely to be resolved in the legislature before they make it. So pretty soon, ballots will be going to printing because they have to be mailed out for absentees actually later on this month. So I think that the ballot itself is finally kind of shaped up to be in the form that it will be when you vote in November or earlier if you vote absentee. But I think these are probably the last pieces coming to change or modify what's on it. I think it's pretty well set.
It'll be here before we know it. So less than 2 months away now. All right, let's talk a little bit about MSU. MSU has been in the news quite a bit lately, and one story is around the MSU Board of Trustees, who'd originally said that vendors could be disqualified if they made contributions to candidates who supported policies that restricted voting. So is that on the table or off the table?
Yes, at the moment, they decided to take it off the table. Now, this one is kind of a shocker. It wasn't on my radar screen. One of the things that we do advocate for here at SBAM is that large purchasers, including government, that they intentionally do business with small businesses. And so whenever there's something that would put kind of a barrier in place, catches our attention. And so this one, it was a Detroit News editorial piece that came out, which kind of drew everybody's attention to this agenda item on this week's Board of Trustees meeting at Michigan State. Michigan State is a very large organization. They do a lot of business with other, in terms of buying goods and services. And so one of the things very strange, like they said that just to map it out, that if you were a vendor of Michigan State, that you could be disqualified if you made a contribution, if somebody at the business, like an owner of the business, made a contribution to a politician who supported policies that restricted voting in some way. And so if you think about to turn that into a real policy, what it would really take, who are the owners of the business? What percentage of ownership of the business would be required to be one of the ones who fall under this policy? And then which candidates, so figuring out here are the owners of the companies, here are the candidates that they supported, then what are the voting records of those candidates that you supported? And it was a clear First Amendment violation to even consider it. There was quite a backlash, right away, and so they pulled it off the agenda. Not clear at this point whether or not it will be coming back. And then, of course, right on the heels of that, Michigan State made more news with the possibility of the resignation or kind of forced up resignation or potentially firing of the president, which was also kind of out of left field. So definitely surprises coming from Michigan State. Seems to be a lot of upheaval there right now. But at the moment, they pulled that policy. But it's given us a new thing to keep track of, one that we really hadn't had to worry about in the past, that could potentially, if it comes up again, will go into action.
All right, let's talk a little bit about some energy news. So Palisades Power Plant in Southwest Michigan, not far from where I grew up, closed in May, and now it's going to come back online.
Yeah, and this was again kind of a surprise, not just because it's going to come back online, but also that it was announced by the governor. So there had been it just seemed like more on the left side of the political spectrum had been shying away from nuclear energy as part of the energy portfolio. And you see overseas in Europe that they're moving away from nuclear energy, and there's some consequence to that. And but anyway, here it was actually announced from a press release from the governor's office that it was coming back online, and it was kind of in the sense of from the approach of saying 600 people will be employed there, and but from our standpoint, where we advocate for a diverse energy portfolio. So people say, what type of do you support? And we like for it not to be concentrated. Wind is fine, solar's fine, natural gas is fine, and nuclear is fine. But better yet, how about all of those things, so that there's all the eggs aren't in one basket? And then you might ask, well, what about coal? Coal is going offline in Michigan. It's already been a lot of progress away from coal, and that's an imported energy anyway. So all of those others, natural gas is domestically produced. Nuclear, while it's technically imported, I guess it's really a with the reaction in the core. It's not something where there's constant inputs that are coming in from other places. And then, of course, energy, wind and solar. So it's this really, the way this shapes up between the Fermi plants over and on the other side of the state that DTE has nuclear energy, and now Palisades coming back online. It really does give us really solid domestically produced, like within our state, energy, where less of our dependence would be on actions that are happening other places that could be subject to other states' rules and restrictions and input costs. So this is welcome news, and kind of a surprise, and one that would maybe be a little bit of an indication that perhaps across the political spectrum there's a little more openness to an all of the above approach than what it may have seemed like lately.
All right, it's now time for Data Monday.
All right, well, I think we talked a little bit last week about some of the labor numbers that had come out, and so I want to focus on some of that today, but some really good or interesting, I should say, information. Some good, some not as good. But so let's start with labor force participation. So there's a couple of ways you can look at this in a lot of different ways, but what's considered prime working age, which is ages 25 to 54, you actually see that up higher now, and between 82 and 83%, and getting pretty close to that pre-pandemic level. So that's great news. Now, if you look at everybody else, though, you'll see or if you look at it across the board, you'll see that that's about 62%. And of course, Michigan is a couple percent lower than the national average. But as you look at this, while the prime working age folks are kind of pretty close to back to normal, in Michigan, we have traditionally relied on older workers, and that's why we're feeling the pinch more here as you look at the overall labor force participation rate, still much, much lower than the average. If you look here where it was at 63% before, and a full percentage point. And I know it doesn't sound like that much, but that in global or macroeconomic terms, that's pretty big. This I found super interesting here, that so you got household employment, but then you got new jobs created. And it's interesting, sometimes these numbers move together and sometimes they look a little incongruent. Lately, they've looked incongruent. And if you peel back the layers a little bit, here's one of the reasons. And that is, while you've got the household employment has been kind of level, and total household employment, the number of people that are employed, and yet jobs have been growing. How could that be? Well, look what's happening with people that have multiple jobs. That's actually trending up. So that's been going up while total household employment has been flat. So that it's something really to keep an eye on, or maybe I'll do a little reflecting on why multiple job holders is moving at a faster clip. Now the employment diffusion gives a sense for the momentum in job creation that's happening. And without getting into all the details of what goes into this, if it's above 50, then you've got growth. If it's below 50, you have contraction, and generally in the job market. And it looks at a lot of different factors. I've just kind of oversimplified it. What it's showing here is that there's, it's been kind of flat, but generally lately it's been going down, which means that new job creation is losing some steam compared to what it had before, but still job growth. I wanted to make sure it was clear. Just because the rate of growth has come down, it doesn't mean that there isn't job growth, and that's debatable on what economists would want to see right now. A little slower job growth is something that would indicate that that inflation might be starting to come down. If you look at the job reports or the labor reports that came out last week, the biggest moving industries up and down, you'll see mining actually up 2.72%, and not surprising given all the move toward electrification and battery technology requires a lot of, it does require a lot of mining, but on the opposite end, the coal mining is actually down 1.5%. So both, I thought that, the biggest up and the biggest down were both different forms of mining. I thought was kind of interesting. Now, looking at inflation projections, I would actually tend to I think there's good reason to believe that these projections are pretty close. You've got headline inflation, which just includes all the commodities, and so it'd be things like gasoline, for example, and the different food indexes. And then you've got your core inflation, which are the things that that don't include the commodities, and the target down here at 2%. So looking at this, the projection is that it's going to start to come down pretty sharply. The Federal Reserve has been extremely aggressive with trying to get inflation under control after ignoring it for way too long. But now that we're in this kind of aggressive action, I would agree that this is that it's likely that it is going to come down. It's not going to. I mean, it maybe is starting to come down now. In this last month, it was not up as much as it had been in previous months. So I think there's reason to believe the projections have some legitimacy to it. But as long as we see wage growth at this type of a level, so the Atlanta Fed wage growth tracker, this is the overall wage growth, you can see that's a pretty sharp upward graph here. And even though it looks like it may be leveling off here a little bit with the most recent data, it's still up pretty high. And this is the sort of thing that will keep that core inflation number, not the commodities, but the core inflation number higher. And this is really what I think the Federal Reserve is going to want to see turn around and start to come down before they ease up on monetary policy. And then looking at a couple of different categories within wage growth, you'll see in the blue is the lowest earning quartile. That's up higher. So these entry-level jobs that maybe used to be $10, $12 an hour are regular, $15 to $20 an hour now. So you've seen bigger jumps. And then in the highest earning quartile, those are up too, but not as much as the lower. And then the last one I wanted to share with you is the trade deficits. So you'll see China is the one on the bottom. And to be on the bottom means it's the biggest trade deficit that we have. Because if you look at the scale on the left-hand side, you'll see that these are all negative. These are trade deficits. It means below the axis. And so these are negative numbers. So the lower you are in the chart, the bigger the trade deficit is. But it does seem to have kind of leveled off. And I think that the reason that is China's pandemic management, that they're economically kind of shooting themselves in the foot, and it's hurt their GDP growth, which you talked about, and they were really in a position. I think there were a lot of projections that our trade deficit would get a lot would continue to get bigger, and yet it's kind of held off steady. And then you'll see European Union and Mexico being pretty steady as well. So in this case, I think the overall indication here is that the wage inflation is still likely to keep the Federal Reserve nervous. There'll be new inflation numbers that come out. Data Monday next week. I expect we'll have new inflation numbers to talk about. But I do expect to see those high, but not as high as before. And that'll be a pretty good indication that some of the headline inflation is coming down, but the core inflation is probably going to be high. It's harder to get that to come down than the commodities. So that's the report so far, and we'll be back next time with the rest of the story in terms of the new inflation numbers as soon as they come out.
All right. Two quick things. One, SBAM is having an owner-to-owner event tomorrow in Marquette. So if you're in the Marquette area, please join us. You can visit our website, sbam.org/events, to learn more. Brian, you'll be there visiting with members and small business owners in the area. And then we will see you from the golf outing on Thursday at 3 p.m. We'll be on site at the Medalist in Marshall. So we'll check in from there. In the meantime, have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, everybody. See you on Thursday.